What if I told you that one sentence, calm, clear, and spoken without anger, could make a narcissist fear you forever? Not because it insults them, but because it reveals something far more powerful, that you no longer need them to define who you are. A narcissist thrives on control. It's the air they breathe, the invisible thread they try to tie around your emotions, your thoughts, and even your sense of self. Control isn't always loud or aggressive. Sometimes it's quiet and calculated, masked as concern, love, or protection. But at its core, it's about power. Power over how you see yourself, how you respond to situations, and how much of your identity you're willing to compromise to stay connected to them. When you understand that, you begin to realize that the most threatening thing to a narcissist is not confrontation, it's liberation. The moment you no longer allow them to pull your strings, they start to unravel. What a narcissist fears more than being called out is being irrelevant. As long as they control how you feel, they maintain influence. They might gaslight you to question your memory or perception, play victim to trigger your guilt, or give you breadcrumbs of affection when you're slipping away. It's a cycle carefully designed to keep you within reach, emotionally dependent, and subtly question your own clarity. When you are hooked on their approval or constantly seeking resolution, you become trapped in a loop where they dictate your emotional state. That's control, not in the traditional aggressive sense, but in a far more manipulative and psychological way. It's like they slowly convince you that your emotional compass only works when it's pointing toward them. But the real shift happens when you begin to reclaim your autonomy, not loudly, not with vengeance, but with quiet certainty. You stop justifying yourself. You stop explaining your boundaries. You no longer react to their provocations. You don't get pulled into circular arguments or the need to prove your worth. This unnerves a narcissist because it signals a loss of grip. The moment you show that their approval no longer fuels your self-esteem, they lose their central source of power. You are no longer the puppet they once played. You are becoming someone they can't access, and that scares them more than any insult or confrontation ever could. It's important to understand that narcissists are not empowered people. They are deeply insecure individuals who wear a mask of superiority to cover their internal chaos. When you take back control of your reactions, your energy, and your self-perception, you expose that mask without even touching it. They can no longer play the role of savior, critic, or victim in your life. They become just another person. And for someone who needs to feel significant, that's unbearable. Your detachment becomes the mirror they can't stand to look into. And as you grow stronger, calmer, and more rooted in yourself, they begin to fear what they once underestimated: the power of someone who no longer needs them to feel whole. Emotional detachment is one of the most powerful tools when dealing with a narcissist because it directly undermines their main strategy, eliciting reactions. Narcissists thrive on emotional responses: anger, confusion, guilt, or even admiration. Every time you react to their manipulation, they gain confirmation that they still have influence over you, whether it's through provoking arguments, guilt-tripping you with their victimhood, or drawing you into cycles of love bombing and withdrawal. Their goal is always to hook you emotionally. Once they succeed in that, they have access to your decision-making, your self-worth, and your boundaries. But when you begin to emotionally detach, you signal something very different. You show them that their ability to stir your inner world is disappearing. Detachment is not indifference. It doesn't mean you no longer care about yourself or the situation. Instead, it means that you are no longer investing your emotional energy into a person who only uses it to serve their own ego. Emotional detachment allows you to observe their behavior without absorbing it. You can hear their accusations, their praise, or their provocations, and still stay rooted in your truth. You are no longer on the roller coaster they keep trying to ride with you. This unsettles them deeply because they can't play their usual roles if you don't respond on cue. The narcissist who once thrived on your tears, your explanations, or your arguments suddenly finds himself talking to someone who doesn't flinch. That is terrifying to someone whose entire identity depends on control. When you stop reacting, they become exposed. The manipulative comments no longer land. The charm they use to win you back loses its effect. The guilt trips don't work because you're no longer carrying the emotional debt they've tried to assign you. And what begins to happen is a shift of power, not in a dramatic, vengeful way, but in a quiet and steady reversal of roles. Now they are the ones seeking a response, craving your emotional engagement, and facing the emptiness of their tactics. The very silence they once used against you becomes your armor. The more you practice detachment, the more their control shrinks. Emotional detachment also gives you clarity. Without the fog of emotional manipulation, you begin to see the patterns for what they are. You can predict the cycles, recognize the bait, and stay grounded in your reality. You are no longer trying to fix them or explain yourself to them. You are no longer hoping for validation that never truly arrives. Instead, you become someone who meets their chaos with calm, who no longer confuses intensity with intimacy, and who no longer feels the need to respond to every emotional hook they throw. For a narcissist, that is not just inconvenient, it's terrifying, because they no longer recognize you as the person who used to give them emotional fuel. You have become someone beyond their reach. The power of boundaries cannot be overstated when it comes to disarming a narcissist. Boundaries are not just physical or verbal limits. They are clear internal decisions about what you will and will not allow into your emotional and mental space. For someone who operates through manipulation, guilt, and control, boundaries are both confusing and threatening. A narcissist sees other people as extensions of themselves, tools to fulfill their own needs, or mirrors to reflect back the image they want to project. So when you begin to enforce boundaries, you disrupt that entire framework. You are no longer someone they can mold or maneuver at will. You become an individual with your own center of gravity, and that is deeply unsettling for them. Narcissists push boundaries in subtle and overt ways. They might question your right to privacy, override your choices, dismiss your emotions, or punish you for asserting independence. Early in a relationship, they might charm their way through your limits, convincing you that your standards are unreasonable or that love means full access. But over time, they begin to test how far they can go, how much they can take, and how little they can give in return. When you begin to clearly communicate and maintain your boundaries, especially without guilt or aggression, they start to sense a loss of control. This makes them anxious, even fearful, because their power depends on your emotional flexibility and self-doubt. Setting boundaries is not about building walls or becoming cold. It's about honoring your needs and protecting your peace. It's the act of saying, this is what I accept and this is what I will not tolerate. And the strength lies not in how loudly you declare it, but in how consistently you uphold it. Narcissists will often test your limits repeatedly, hoping to wear you down or make you second-guess yourself. But each time you stand firm, they receive a message that their tactics no longer work. This shakes their confidence in their ability to control the relationship dynamic. The moment they see that your decisions are not driven by their approval or your fear of losing them, they begin to lose interest or panic. What makes boundaries especially powerful is that they are rooted in self-respect. You are no longer negotiating your worth based on how someone else treats you. You are not seeking their permission to be yourself. You stop justifying your needs, and instead you start protecting them as non-negotiables. This emotional independence creates a kind of distance that narcissists cannot cross. They may try harder, become more manipulative, or shift to playing the victim to regain control. But the boundary remains, a firm, quiet signal that you are no longer available for emotional exploitation. This isn't just a rejection of their behavior, it's a declaration of your growth. And for a narcissist, nothing is more threatening than someone who refuses to play by the rules of their broken game. Narcissists hate accountability because it directly challenges the false self they've spent years constructing. At the core of narcissism is a fragile ego hidden behind a mask of confidence, superiority, or victimhood. Holding them accountable threatens this mask. It means asking them to take responsibility for their words, actions, and the consequences of their behavior, something that completely opposes their internal narrative. They don't want to be seen as flawed or wrong. They want to be admired, feared, envied, or pitied, but never responsible. So when someone calmly and clearly brings their behavior into the light, without rage, without drama, and without trying to fix them, the narcissist feels cornered in a way that cuts through all their defenses. When you hold a narcissist accountable, you're not attacking them. You're simply not allowing the conversation to drift into blame shifting or emotional chaos. You're not entertaining their diversions, justifications, or emotional manipulation. You stay rooted in what happened, how it affected you, and what needs to change. This emotional clarity is unnerving to someone who survives through confusion. They may respond with defensiveness, anger, silence, or even feigned remorse, hoping to shift the emotional tone and regain control. But what terrifies them most is that you're no longer reacting in the way you used to. You're no longer explaining yourself endlessly, questioning your reality, or getting caught in a loop of guilt. You're presenting truth in a calm, grounded way and refusing to carry their emotional baggage. Accountability doesn't always have to be spoken. Sometimes it shows up through your actions. You stop responding to the manipulative text. You don't accept hollow apologies. You no longer tolerate gaslighting or minimize the damage they cause. You call things by their real name. When they lie, you see it. When they blame you for their own behavior, you don't internalize it. This kind of clarity is dangerous to a narcissist because it means they've lost control over your perception. Their version of events no longer overrides your lived experience. That is a direct threat to their sense of dominance and superiority. What makes accountability even more powerful is when it's paired with emotional detachment. You're not asking for change, begging for recognition, or trying to prove your point. You're simply placing the mirror in front of them and stepping back. They're left with their own reflection, and without your emotional energy to twist it, that reflection becomes harder to ignore. Narcissists are often skilled at turning accountability into an attack. They'll accuse you of being too sensitive, unforgiving, or controlling, but if you don't take the bait, if you stay firm without being aggressive, their ability to manipulate the situation weakens. You shift from being someone they can control to someone who sees them clearly, and that clarity becomes your strength. Holding them accountable is not about changing them. Is about refusing to lose yourself in their version of reality. and for a narcissist, nothing is more threatening than a person who refuses to accept their illusion as truth. Narcissists crave admiration, not truth. Their entire self-image is built on being seen as special, superior, or exceptional. They don't seek connection through authenticity. They seek validation through illusion. Every relationship, every conversation, every interaction is carefully designed to feed that illusion. The truth threatens it. The truth reveals flaws, contradictions, and imperfections they've spent their whole lives trying to cover. But when you speak the truth, especially when it's delivered with calm, quiet certainty, they feel exposed. They fear truth because it's not something they can manipulate. And they especially fear those who can speak it without fear of them. Telling the truth to a narcissist is not about confrontation. It's not about shouting or accusing. It's about making a simple observation, expressing a clear feeling, or identifying a toxic pattern, and doing it without shrinking, apologizing, or doubting yourself. Narcissists are used to twisting reality in their favor. They deny what happened, rewrite history, or turn the focus back on you to avoid taking responsibility. But when you remain steady in your truth and refuse to be pulled into their emotional spin, they start to realize they're losing control. You're no longer trapped in their story. You're standing in your own. This is why narcissists tend to surround themselves with people who won't challenge them. They look for partners, friends, or colleagues who admire them, who don't ask too many questions, who accept the version of reality the narcissist presents. These people become mirrors, constantly reflecting back an image of perfection and control. But when someone comes along who sees through the facade and isn't afraid to say what they see, the narcissists feel threatened. They fear being seen not as they present themselves, but as they truly are: fragile, insecure, manipulative, and deeply afraid of not being enough. It's important to understand that the truth you speak doesn't have to be big or dramatic. It can be as simple as saying, "That's not how I experienced it," or "That doesn't feel respectful," or "I see a pattern here." These statements are powerful because they don't ask for permission and they don't seek validation. They just exist as fact from your perspective. And when you're no longer trying to convince them, win their approval, or avoid upsetting them, you shift the power dynamic entirely. You become someone they can't easily fool, someone who can't be guilt-tripped or manipulated into silence, someone who doesn't fear what they might say, but calmly stands in their own knowing. To a narcissist, this is dangerous, because the more you speak your truth, the more their illusion crumbles. You're no longer a source of supply, no longer feeding their ego, no longer dancing around their feelings. You're grounded in your own reality, and they can't survive in that space. The admiration they once demanded is replaced with honesty they cannot handle. And in that moment, they're no longer in charge of the story. You are? The one sentence that makes the narcissist fear you forever must reflect inner authority, because that is what they cannot touch, manipulate, or destroy. Inner authority is the quiet, unshakable sense of who you are, what you feel, what you need, what you believe, regardless of what anyone else thinks. It is not about power over others, but power within yourself. A narcissist fears this because their influence depends entirely on how easily they can distort your perception of self. When you possess inner authority, you become emotionally sovereign. You're no longer waiting for approval or reacting to disapproval. You don't need their validation to feel real, seen, or whole. And that makes you immune to their tactics. Narcissists control others by creating confusion. They make you question your memory, your intentions, your boundaries, and your worth. They use charm and cruelty in cycles, creating emotional highs and lows that keep you dependent on them. They condition you to seek clarity from them instead of from within yourself. But the moment you tap into your own clarity, the moment you no longer look outward for certainty, they lose that grip. You become grounded in your own truth, and it's a reality they cannot rewrite. The sentence that reflects inner authority is powerful not because of how it's said, but because of what stands behind it. It carries your healing, your courage, and your refusal to abandon yourself ever again. It might be something like, "I will no longer negotiate with someone who needs me to doubt myself in order to feel powerful." That sentence isn't about blame or retaliation. It doesn't scream or plead. It simply announces a new internal boundary, one that doesn't need their agreement. When you say something like this, not just in words, but in the energy you live by, you're declaring that you now stand in full ownership of your emotional reality. Narcissists can only manipulate people who doubt themselves. They need your insecurity to dominate the conversation. They need you to be uncertain so they can guide your feelings. But a person with inner authority no longer reacts to manipulation because they're not afraid to stand alone. They don't second-guess their values just because someone disapproves. They don't collapse when criticized or melt when flattered. They're no longer fragile in the face of external pressure. That steadiness is terrifying to a narcissist because it means you've stepped outside their control and they know they can't follow you there. When you speak from inner authority, you don't just remove the narcissist's power, you remove the illusion that they ever had any. They may attempt to reassert control to provoke you back into self-doubt, but you're no longer available for that game. You've outgrown the role they tried to assign you. And when they realize they cannot shake your center anymore, they also realize something even more frightening, that the reflection they once manipulated is gone, and what's left is someone they cannot dominate, deceive, or define. The greatest fear of a narcissist is not confrontation, rejection, or even exposure. It is your transformation. When you stop reacting, when you stop explaining, when you stop needing them to validate your truth, you become someone they cannot control. You begin to live from a place of deep inner authority where your peace is not up for negotiation. You're no longer caught in their emotional storms, no longer seduced by their praise or silenced by their blame. You become unshakable, not because you're loud, but because you're rooted. And in that quiet strength lies the sentence that makes them fear you forever. It's not just the words you speak. It's the self you finally refuse to abandon. When you rise in your wholeness, they realize the game is over. Because you've reclaimed the one thing they never wanted you to find, yourself.